Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today, well, it's pretty focused. We're trying to cut through a lot of noise, a lot of institutional fog, really,
Yeah.
surrounding a former police officer.
Yeah, someone whose professional misconduct, the, let's say, legal limbo he's in now, and some, frankly, bizarre personal secrets, it
Uh,
all adds up.
It really does. It's a uniquely frustrating case study when you think about public accountability. We're diving deep into the facts we have on Brandon Beak, formerly of the Inglewood Police Department, the IPD.
And this deep dive is, well, it's essential because Beak's story, his actions, why he was terminated, how he sort of vanished from the official record, it's all tied up in this bigger systemic failure.
Right, within the IPD, during that, 2006 to 2009 period,
Yeah.
a really critical time for them.
Exactly. So we're structuring this around basically three key questions drawing right from the sources you've got there. First, what were the confirmed allegations, the ones that actually led to him being fired back in 2007? Second, and this is crucial, why is the information so patchy, so fragmented? We need to look at that institutional secrecy, the record destruction, how that muddied the waters.
Makes sense.
And finally, how do all these pieces, the fragments we do have, professional misconduct, the alleged polygamy, how do they paint this really complex, kind of troubling picture of the whole person?
Okay, let's unpack that, starting with the official story, I guess. The professional downfall.
Mhm.
March 2007, Brandon Beak's career comes to a pretty dramatic end.
And he wasn't alone, right?
No, not at all. His termination was part of what the sources keep calling a massive internal affairs investigation. A purge, they called it. 6 other officers went out with him.
So this wasn't just a quiet exit.
Definitely not. It felt like a public statement, like we're cleaning house.
Right. And the official reason given at first, it sounded almost minor, relatively speaking. Something about officers allegedly visiting massage parlors or covering for officers who did, a bit vague.
A bit vague, yeah.
Hmm.
But the sources suggest the full internal investigation was looking at something much, much more serious than just, visiting a business off-duty.
Exactly. The sources confirmed the wider allegations involved department employees actually having sex with female employees at these places, massage parlors, maybe other businesses, while the officers are on the clock. On duty.
Okay, that raises the stakes immediately. I mean, commercial sex acts, while in uniform, potentially using your badge, your authority, that's just devastating for public trust.
Absolutely. But the source material gets even more specific about the actual legal violations they were investigating.
So what were they looking at specifically?
Well, it's critical to grasp the intent here. This wasn't just some internal slap on the wrist and ethics review. The conduct they were scrutinizing involved potential violations of California Penal Code sections, actual crimes related to prostitution and solicitation.
Okay, like what?
When you look at the codes mentioned, we're talking possible charges for soliciting prostitution, that's Penal Code 647B, but it seems the investigation went further, looking into potential pimping PC 266H and pandering PC 266.
Wait, pimping and pandering, those are just minor offenses. Those are serious felonies, right?
Yeah.
Facilitating, profiting from prostitution.
Exactly. Those are heavy charges. If those were potentially on the table, it suggests the scope of this alleged corruption, well, it must have been pretty expensive.
It points towards more than just individual officers acting out.
It indicates the misconduct might not have been just, individual participation. It suggests potential involvement in organizing or, crucially, covering up a criminal enterprise. And that's where that phrase covering for officers who did becomes so important.
Right. What did that imply, according to the sources?
The sources explicitly state this implied looking into more serious misconduct, including potential conspiracy, filing false police reports, or actively obstructing internal investigations.
So potentially using their official power, their position, to shield illegal acts from getting investigated or prosecuted.
That's the implication. If officers were doing that, it points towards, well, maybe an embedded network of corruption right there in the department.
And the sources also suggest this wasn't just a one-off thing for Beak, right?
Yeah.
There was some kind of pattern before the big purge.
That's right. This internal affairs probe didn't just pop up overnight. There were precursors. The sources mention a specific incident in December 2006. Beak and another officer, Don V. Lindsay, followed a woman they suspected of prostitution.
Okay.
Now, that specific incident wasn't the direct cause of the mass firing in March '07, but it definitely fed into the picture, the dossier being built up about vice activity. It showed a pattern, interactions with people involved in commercial sex.
And that other officer, Lindsay, he was also terminated.
He was, yes. Also terminated, though it seems later and for separate, Very serious allegations involving alleged rape down in Florida. Charges weren't filed in that case, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. Okay, so it just reinforces this picture of
Yeah.
systemic issues, right? Vice, misconduct, a real crisis of integrity among some officers there at that time.
It really sets the scene for just how bad things were. So by March 2007, Beak is confirmed fired. Serious vice-related misconduct, part of a huge purge. That should be the clear end of the story, professionally speaking.
But it wasn't.
No. And this is exactly where things get murky, where the institutional silence kicks in.
Okay, let's shift to that institutional fog,
Mm-hmm.
because this is where the whole question of what actually happened to Brandon Beak turns into, well, an indictment of the IPD's own practices. Why is it so hard to find specific public details about these allegations against him?
Well, part of the initial scarcity is just the nature of how it was handled. His firing was administrative. It happened inside the department.
Not through the courts.
Exactly. The sources are clear. There's no evidence of criminal charges against Beak arising from the incident. And when things are handled internally like that, the department really controls the story, controls who sees the records.
Yeah.
But the main problem, the really cynical institutional move, that came much, much later.
You're talking about Inglewood's record destruction, that whole controversy.
Precisely. Late 2018, the city of Inglewood undertakes this massive action, destroying hundreds of police records. Hundreds.
And the timing was suspicious.
Profoundly suspicious. It happened just weeks before a new California law, Senate Bill 1421, was set to take effect.
Right, SB 1421. Remind us, why would that law make a police department want to shred records right before it kicked in? What did it do?
SB 1421 was huge for transparency. It basically mandated, for the first time really, public access to certain kinds of internal affairs records that had always been kept secret in California.
What kinds of records specifically?
It targeted records about sustained findings of officer misconduct involving things like sexual assault, dishonesty during investigations, and, crucially for this context, all records about use of force incidents that caused serious injury or death.
Okay, so the department suddenly realized that decades of their internal dirt, the kind of stuff that led to the Beak purge, presumably was about to become public knowledge. People could finally see it.
That's exactly how it looked. The 2018 purge was widely seen as a deliberate, aggressive move to get ahead of the transparency law. By destroying those files right before SB 1421 took effect, the city basically shielded past misconduct almost certainly, including records from that 2006-2007 vice purge era, from public scrutiny, from legal challenges.
It wasn't just spring cleaning then.
No. It felt like erasing history to avoid accountability. That was the interpretation by transparency advocates, certainly.
And disturbingly, the sources say this wasn't a one-time thing. They kept trying to destroy records even after 2018.
They did. The sources mention this pattern continued. It got to the point where the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, had to step in.
What happened?
In 2021, so years after that first big purge, the ACLU actually got a court order to stop Inglewood from destroying more police records.
Wow. So even after the controversy, they were still at it.
Apparently so, which suggests, an ongoing active resistance to transparency, to complying with the spirit, if not the letter, of the law.
So connecting this back to Brandon Beak, the relevance is crystal clear. Any documents detailing the specifics of his firing, maybe later internal reviews or his final status, they might have just been deliberately wiped out.
It creates huge barriers, possibly insurmountable ones if you're trying to do a comprehensive investigation now. When the institution that's supposed to uphold the law is actively destroying evidence of its own past failures, well, the public's ability to hold individuals like Beak fully accountable is just fundamentally compromised.
The sources really emphasize that fragmentation, that lack of a clear picture.
Yeah, and you add to that the timing of his departure. This all happened just before the digital explosion.
Right, 2007. It's easy to forget.
We do forget. 2007 was basically pre-social media saturation. Trying to track down someone who dropped off the map in 2007 is way, way harder than finding someone who disappeared in, say, 2017.
And the digital searches mentioned in the sources confirmed that difficulty, right? They looked for him online.
They did. Extensive searches looking for known identifiers, potential usernames like Batphone895 or @BrandonBeak, came up completely empty. It just reinforces how low his public profile has been since 2007.
And they specifically ruled out one potential lead.
Yes, and it's important to highlight this. They found a Twitter or X profile under Brandon Beak, but it was definitively ruled out. It belongs to someone else, entirely different guy. Lives in Toronto, works in retail, confirmed wrong person based on geography, age, everything.
So no confirmed digital footprint.
None. Which again underscores how successfully he, or maybe the circumstances, allowed him to just disappear from public view after he was fired.
Okay, so this combination, the institutional secrecy, the record destruction, the pre-digital timing, it leads us right into the most confusing part of his story. The conflicting accounts about whether he's even still employed there.
Exactly. That ambiguity, that confusion, it's a direct result of the record purge. It didn't just create gaps, it created conflicting stories.
How so?
Well, most of the detailed reports you look at, the ones based on public statements from back in 2007, the known facts of the purge, they treat that March 2007 termination as final. Done deal, career over.
That seems logical based on the purge itself.
It does. These reports conclude he just maintained a low profile afterwards. But the sources also contain this completely contradictory claim, a very specific and frankly disturbing counter-narrative.
Which is?
One source explicitly claims he was fired and then hired back. He still works there.
Hired back after all that.
That's the claim. And it doesn't just say he was rehired. It directly attributes this alleged rehiring to extreme corruption still within the IPD. And, crucially, this source claims the department destroyed the files specifically to make this happen, to cover up his return.
Okay, hold on. So we have two totally different stories. One, fired, gone, end of story, based on their 2007 facts.
Yeah.
Two, fired, but then secretly rehired, thanks to corruption and shredded records.
You've got it. Two separate, completely conflicting narratives. One based on the official record, as it stood before the destruction. The other based on this unverified but very detailed claim of ongoing corruption enabled by that destruction.
But wait a minute. If the claim is he was rehired, and the reason we can't prove or disprove it is because the department destroyed the proof, doesn't that almost make the second story more believable? Or at least, doesn't the act of destruction itself become the main point?
That's the core takeaway, I think. The ambiguity itself proves the success of the record purge. It achieved its goal, obscuring accountability. The public literally cannot verify or refute this serious claim of rehiring because the evidence needed his personnel file. His current status was likely eliminated by the very department implicated in the claim.
So Inglewood effectively made it impossible for anyone, citizens, maybe even courts, to know for sure what happened to Brandon Beak's career.
They destroyed the certainty. That's the impact.
But regardless of whether he's wearing a badge today or not, his past actions still cast a long shadow professionally, right? Because he's on that critical list.
Yeah.
The Brady list.
Yes, that's confirmed. Brandon Beak appears on the Brady list for the Inglewood Police Department, and that is a permanent mark.
For listeners who might not know, what exactly is the Brady list? Why is it so significant?
So it comes from a Supreme Court case, Brady v. Maryland, back in '63. It established that prosecutors must turn over any evidence to the defense that could potentially help the defendant's case. That's called exculpatory evidence, or evidence that could undermine the credibility of prosecution witnesses, including police officers. That's impeachment evidence.
Okay.
So police officers who have a documented history of things like lying, falsifying reports, racial bias, excessive force, or, like in Beak's case, serious misconduct that reflects on their honesty or integrity. They get put on this list, sometimes called a Giglio list after another case.
So if Beak is on that list because of the 2007 incident, what does that mean practically? For his career, or if he was somehow rehired?
It's devastating professionally. It means any time a criminal case might hinge on Brandon Beak's testimony or his investigation, the prosecutor is legally required to tell the defense lawyer, hey, just so you know, this officer has a history of serious misconduct and credibility issues documented here.
And the defense lawyer would obviously use that.
Oh, absolutely. They'd use it to hammer his credibility on the stand, to suggest he can't be trusted. It makes it incredibly difficult, sometimes impossible, for a prosecutor to build a case that relies heavily on that officer's word. It essentially taints any case he's significantly involved in.
So even if his current employment status is a mystery wrapped in shredded paper, his past is officially documented as problematic for law enforcement purposes.
Exactly. It's a permanent stain, confirming his professional history carries significant weight, no matter what he's doing now.
That's a really powerful point about the lasting impact. Okay, let's pivot now. We've talked about institutional secrecy, the professional fog, but the story takes this sharp turn into personal secrecy too, and it's quite something.
It is, and the transition feels almost seamless, doesn't it? Because it's the same theme, really. Successfully keeping hidden realities hidden until they're not.
Right.
The sources confirm this really remarkable personal scandal that kind of mirrors the professional secrecy. It's stated as a confirmed fact. Beak lived a complete double life.
And not just like minor deception. This was structurally complex deception.
Extremely. We're talking about marriage. The confirmed details are he was married. Then, while still married to his first wife, he married a second woman.
Whoa.
And to make the deception even more tangled, the sources say the second woman was actually a friend of his first wife.
A friend of the first wife.
Wow.
That's audacious. That's a high-wire act of deceit.
Incredibly high stakes. Meticulous, complex, sustained over who knows how long.
So how did this personal house of cards come down?
Well, the facade eventually cracked. The double life got exposed when the second wife, the friend of the first wife, apparently discovered, as the sources put it, crazy things. That discovery led her to divorce him.
Okay, so divorce from the second wife. But were there other consequences? Bigamy, polygamy? Those are illegal, right?
They are. And the consequences didn't stop with the divorce. The sources confirm that Brandon Beak is currently, or was recently, in court facing legal proceedings specifically because of polygamy.
So the law did catch up with him on the personal side, even if the professional side is obscured.
It seems so. Which leads to this really interesting synthesis, right? You have this individual whose professional accountability was arguably blocked by institutional secrecy, the record destruction. But his equally complex personal secrecy, this double life, was ultimately undone by non-institutional means by the individuals he deceived finding out.
It's ironic. The professional status is ambiguous because the official records are gone, but the personal status, the polygamy, is now potentially a matter of public court record.
Exactly. The very ambiguity surrounding whether he was fired or rehired, fueled by destroyed files, is mirrored by the sudden, messy collapse of his hidden personal life. He seems to be someone whose entire story, professional and personal, is defined by managing secrets, by concealment.
The professional secrets were buried by the institution. The personal ones are being unearthed by the courts. It's quite the contrast.
It really is.
Okay, before we wrap up, we absolutely have to place Beak's individual story back into the bigger picture. Because his firing, the whole Vice scandal, it wasn't happening in a vacuum, was it? It was a symptom of something much larger at the IPD.
That's the critical context, absolutely. Beak's termination in 2007 happened smack in the middle of this period of intense systemic crisis for the Inglewood Police Department.
What years are we talking about again?
Roughly 2006 to 2009. The department was under a microscope public scrutiny, federal oversight looming because of what the sources call systemic misconduct, excessive force incidents, and federal oversight. His specific misconduct was part of a much broader pattern of dysfunction.
And the sources give some pretty stark examples of that dysfunction, right? Especially around use of force.
Horrifying examples. The statistics mentioned are staggering. Between 2003 and 2008, out of 11 people shot and killed by Inglewood officers, 5 were unarmed. 5 out of 11.
5 unarmed people killed by police in just a few years.
And it peaked in 2008. In just 4 months that year, IPD officers fatally shot 4 people. 3 of those 4 were unarmed.
That's unbelievable.
It includes a really notorious incident where I think 7 officers fired something like over 40 shots at a homeless man. They later found out he only had a replica gun.
Just wow.
And this level of dysfunction, this pattern of excessive force, it had real financial consequences too, right? It wasn't just bad PR.
No, it hit the city's wallet hard. The sources mentioned one high-profile case stemming from that era involving 5 officers who were eventually fired. It led to an $8.6 million settlement for the city.
$8.6 million. That shows you the scale of the liability, the depth of the problems. And that kind of pattern excessive force, huge payouts, that's what gets the federal government's attention.
Which it did. This systemic collapse basically forced a massive intervention.
It absolutely did. It led directly to the U.S. Department of Justice launching what's called a pattern and practice investigation. That officially kicked off in March 2009.
And the goal of a DOJ investigation like that is?
To determine if the police department as a whole is engaging in a pattern or practice of conduct that violates people's constitutional rights. It's a top-down review of the entire department's policies, training, supervision, everything.
And what did the DOJ find in Inglewood? Did it confirm that the kind of systemic failures that allowed Beak's Vice scandal to happen were real?
Oh, absolutely. The DOJ's findings were a scathing indictment of the IPD at that time. They found systemic problems everywhere they looked.
Like what?
Outdated use of force policies that were unclear, too permissive, conflicts of interest baked into how they conducted internal investigations, which often protected officers instead of holding them accountable, major gaps in training records and supervision.
And the complaint process, how people reported misconduct.
Fundamentally flawed. The DOJ found the process seemed designed more to discourage citizens from filing complaints than to actually investigate the complaints they received. It confirmed a deep institutional failure of oversight across the board.
So the crisis that Beak was a part of really did force a fundamental change in leadership, didn't it?
It had to. The reform era really began with the appointment of Jacqueline Seabrooks as chief of police in August 2007, right after the purge Beak was involved in.
And her appointment was significant.
Historically significant, yes. She was California's first African-American woman to be police chief of a municipality. Her mandate was crystal clear. Bring in values-based leadership, establish real accountability, both personal and organizational, stabilize the department, and ultimately implement the reforms the DOJ would eventually require. That included a complete rewrite of the policy manual.
But even with those reforms, that new leadership, the legacy of that era, the difficulty in truly accounting for past misconduct, it still lingers, doesn't it?
It does. Institutional memory is long, and secrecy casts a long shadow. The sources point out that even recent cases show accountability remains a challenge in Inglewood.
Like the Maurice Hastings case.
Exactly. A huge recent example, a $25 million settlement for Maurice Hastings, who spent 38 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, freed by DNA evidence, and the allegations in his case, that Inglewood detectives back in the day fabricated evidence, buried information that could have cleared him.
So decades later, the echoes of that culture of poor investigations, maybe even dishonesty, are still being felt.
Precisely. Beak's case, though focused on vice and happening earlier, is absolutely a piece of that larger, longer history of institutional integrity failures and the struggle for true accountability in Inglewood.
Okay, let's try to pull all these threads together then. Summarize this deep dive on Brandon Beak. What have we found?
Well, we started with a confirmed termination in 2007. Fired for serious vice-related misconduct, visiting massage parlors, potentially covering for others involved in things like solicitation, maybe even pimping or pandering, part of a major departmental purge.
And that misconduct left a permanent mark, landing him on the Brady list for credibility issues.
Right, but then the clarity just dissolves. His subsequent professional history becomes incredibly murky, largely because the Inglewood Police Department destroyed potentially crucial records in 2018, right before that transparency law, SB 1421, kicked in.
Which leaves that central question hanging. Was he just fired and gone? Or was he, as one source claims due to corruption, secretly rehired, with the destroyed records conveniently hiding that fact? You just can't know for sure.
We can't. The institutional secrecy worked in that sense. And then, layered on top of that professional ambiguity, you have this confirmed personal life defined by extreme secrecy.
The complete double life.
Yeah.
Marrying a second woman, a friend of his first wife, while still married, leading to divorce and, according to the sources, an ongoing court case for polygamy.
Exactly. So his story becomes this powerful example of an individual operating through high-stakes concealment, both professionally enabled by institutional actions and personally, until that personal facade finally crumbled.
Which brings us to that final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to mull over.
Yeah, and it's really this. The fact that it's so hard, maybe impossible, to definitively say whether Brandon Beak was rehired or just disappeared, it highlights this core problem for accountability today.
When the institution itself acts to hide the truth.
Precisely. When a police department tasked with upholding the law deliberately destroys public records to get around transparency laws. They're not just hiding one officer's past, they're creating a permanent shield. They're damaging public trust in a fundamental way.
Because the lack of records means.
It means we can never be fully certain. It prevents us from seeing the full picture of Beak's actions, his consequences, his potential ongoing role. But more than that, it ensures that the whole story, the complete picture of individuals like him caught up in systemic failure, remains frustratingly incomplete, forever fragmented, hidden behind a wall that the city itself deliberately built.
A really complex story, detailed, and ultimately, deeply frustrating look at just how fragile transparency can be. Thanks for diving deep with us on this one.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.